Counterfactual history is a very old method of historical analysis, but it's one that's become increasingly popular in recent years. Counterfactual history essentially poses speculative answers to what-if questions, and it's a mode of examining how history would have turned out differently by examining events that never happened. So among the what-if questions that many historians have examined in recent years, they include what if the South had won the American Civil War, what if Hitler had never been born, what if the Persians had defeated the Greeks in the year 480 at Salamis, for instance, and one might ask the question, well, what's the utility of asking any of these kinds of questions? At one level, of course, they're just inherently fascinating because it's in the nature of human beings to wonder what if about our personal lives. Societies, oftentimes in certain eras, also ask questions about their own nation's histories. So what we can understand about the significance of what-if questions is that they shed light really on three things. They shed light, the posing of counterfactual what-if questions sheds light on causality in history, on morality, and on memory. And by talking about causality, morality, and memory, what I'm referring to essentially is explaining why history happens, judging whether what happened was morally upright or morally reprehensible, and moreover, asking how it is that societies remember their pasts. So one can take a concrete example, say the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima in August of 1945. If we want to understand why World War II ended when it did in the Pacific, we would be able to address the conventional explanation that the dropping of the atomic bomb facilitated the end of the war in the Pacific theater. However, if we really want to understand why the war ended in the Pacific when it did, we'd have to pose the question, what would have happened if the atomic bomb hadn't been dropped when it was? But by spinning out the possibilities of how history would have turned out differently, we can better appreciate why it actually happened as it did. So understanding what happened oftentimes requires us to know what might have happened. And then finally, of course, we can also understand the significance of how what-ifs shed light on memory by examining how societies answer the what-if questions that they pose. So if the answer to the question of what if we hadn't dropped the bomb is history would have turned out better, or if the answer is history would have turned out worse, that says a lot about the subjective attitudes of the societies that pose these questions and answer these questions. Counterfactual history is particularly appropriate for histories that have experienced a lot of drama, a lot of turbulence, a lot of turning points. In editing this book, I was very much in a luxurious position of being able to contact people to write on any number of fascinating topics. They span the ancient world through the Middle Ages up until the modern world. And some of the questions that lend themselves very nicely to counterfactual speculation include what if the Exodus had never happened? In the biblical period, of course, with the Jews leaving Egypt, and, well, if that hadn't happened, as one of our scholars answers, you probably wouldn't have had a Jewish people. The question of if the Second Temple had never been destroyed by the Romans, the question of had the Jews not been expelled from Spain in 1492. These are major points of divergence in Jewish history. They really do lend themselves very nicely to what-ifs and to posing alternatives to the way that things actually ended up happening. Jewish studies, of course, is a very diverse field that spans history, sociology, political science, religious studies, literature, and so forth. To my mind, if a mode of analysis opens up debate and fosters discussion and even irritates people, perhaps somewhat, by getting them to rethink the orthodox positions that they've long adhered to, that's all for the good. And I think that this new volume, which is really a pioneering one in the sense that it's the first systematic study to bring 16 specialists from the world of Jewish studies who represent the fields of history and religious studies and literature, it should hopefully have an appeal beyond merely the field of history to the field in general. And because many different disciplines have in fact applied counterfactual thinking within their own realms of inquiry in recent years, one would like to think that this will be appealing and relevant to a lot of different scholars. If I can mix my metaphors, I would say that I'm grateful that the book is coming out in October, late October in the United States, because it will make a great Hanukkah stocking stuffer. This is not your old-fashioned Orthodox perspective on the Jewish past as it inevitably had to happen the way it did. This is a way of really upsetting the apple cart and providing new perspectives on how we can think differently about the past.